So, welcome to yet another episode of the Legal Detour. We're glad to see you here. Listen, we believe in the notion that prevention is better than cure. Hence, we are having such discussions. We're learning from other people's lived experiences. And today, we actually have a story from Anonymous who said, "You have got to talk about the experience that I had after I lost my husband because I want people to learn. Because when I went through this, it was havoc. And I would not wish it for anybody." So today we're here to narrate that story, and we're also going to dissect it. What does the law say about that type of situation? How can you prevent yourself finding yourself in that situation? Or is there anything that you can do so that your loved ones don't find themselves in such a predicament, whether after your death or something has happened, right? So let's not even waste any more time. If you're new here, my name is Yolanda Nyengeza. I'm an attorney by profession, and narrating such issues and talking about legal stuff is my kind of game. So let's get to the discussion. So let's talk about Anonymous's story, right? The one which we'd like to learn from. Listen, let me tell you something about Anonymous's story. It's both very sweet and nice, but kind of rusty at the end. Let's talk about it. So Anonymous was this lady, married, beautiful young lady who happened to lose her spouse. Okay, wait a second. I'm not telling the story correctly. Let's start at the beginning. So Anonymous was a lady in her 20s, doing well for herself, and she was actually very financially savvy. And she decided, you know what, since I'm doing well, I'm in my 20s, why not invest in something that I can always pinpoint to and say, you know, whatever happens, I at least was able to do this for myself. So Anonymous decided, okay, I'm going to purchase an immovable property for myself. And she actually does that. And she buys a relatively nice house for herself, right? And life goes on. It so happens that a couple of months down the line, she then meets this young gentleman that sweeps her off her feet. And the young gentleman actually proposed marriage to her, and she agreed. Now, when they got married in community or property. They were not thinking about contracts, none of that, because they were so in love. So, and Anonymous knew that she was loved, so she was not thinking that there's anything sinister or there's anything that she needs to protect or she needs to, be thinking twice about. She just entered into the marriage, and it was lovely. And she says it was lovely until her husband passed away. So when she married the husband actually did have a child from a previous relationship. But Anonymous says, I did not have a problem because this child, one, was loved by my husband, fully taken care of, and we got along well, right? And that's something that Anonymous also admired. And so they got along very well, lived in this house. It was a happy story. Obviously, the child was living with the mother, and Anonymous was only living with the husband. The child would come and visit from time to time. Now, here's the thing. After a couple of years married to her husband, Anonymous states that the husband started getting a bit sick. Turned out to be something very serious, and then he abruptly passed away. Now, when he passed away, obviously hearts were broken, people were shattered because he was still very young. But now, Anonymous has to take up the responsibility of administering the property, right, or the estate of her husband. So she then starts with talking to the banks. Listen, so-and-so has passed away, so we're going to need you to put a pause on everything that he had, bank accounts and all of that. So the bank is like, oh, okay. In actual fact, he even has a will with us that he drafted a couple of years ago. And we'd like to think that's the only will that he has. And Anonymous says, yes, that's the only one probably he has. I've never heard anything about any other will. And so, okay, the bank decides, okay, we're going to take out the will. We're going to read it for you so you understand. So the will was drafted years ago, prior to Anonymous getting married to her husband. And it so happened that at the time, the husband, the only person that he knew he needed to take care of was his child. And so in this will, he said everything he has would go to his daughter. Now, this is where the problem starts, because Anonymous is married to this man who has now passed away. and he has nominated that everything he has must go to this child. So obviously there's nothing wrong with the husband living his affairs in this manner, right? Because at the time of him drafting the will, he only had that child. And number two, I'm sure even Anonymous would not have a problem with such a provision, but then this is when things got complicated, Anonymous says. Because remember, everything that Anonymous now had, or rather the husband and Anonymous have, had to come together, and that would then be their joint estate. And now these things needed to be split in the middle, and then 50% of those things were now going to have to be given to the child of the deceased, which is Anonymous's husband. Now, that was also not a problem. But when everything was being calculated, right, in terms of debts and what's in the estate, assets, etc., it was clear that not only were they now going to share their movable properties amongst the both of them, the child and Anonymous, but also now Anonymous had to share half of her house to the child. Anonymous at first was okay with this arrangement because remember, during the lifetime of the husband, she got along well with the child. There was not really much of a problem. There's never been a situation, according to Anonymous. But now Anonymous says, remember, the child, as much as we get along, they're not my child. So what started happening is that after the child and the mother of the child discovered that, oh, okay, the daughter's meant to get half of the property, meaning that they're now going to be co-owners of the immovable property that Anonymous had bought, they then started making demands. In fact, they moved into the house, you know, they would have visitors. So now Anonymous's living arrangements were not as comfortable because the daughter was now being influenced by the mother. So everything turned upside down. Anonymous for a second thought maybe they could make it work because, you know, there was this long-term, you know, standing relationship that they had now established because of Anonymous being married to the deceased, which is the father of the daughter. But it seemed a lot was at play because influence was also in it. So eventually they had to make a decision. Anonymous says, one of the things that broke me is that I had to make the option or come to a decision that, you know what, maybe we need to sell and split and go our separate ways. And Anonymous says, you know, surprisingly, when I made this offer or tabled this option in front of the mother and the daughter, they were actually very euphoric. So meaning that their plan was to frustrate Anonymous so that everything could be sold so that they can get their money. And that's exactly what ended up happening. And Anonymous says at the time, because of how things turned out, right, having to lose someone, you know, especially as that, and the finances going haywire, she says she couldn't buy them out of the property. So she literally had to put the property on the market, and they got their half share, and she took what she could get from that, and she had to go and start all over again. Crazy story, eh? But that's exactly what happened to Anonymous. One, we need to now dissect. Why did this happen? I think you've captured why this happened, right? But we're also going to just expand on it. Why did it happen? Two, is there a way that Anonymous could have prevented this? Is there a way that the husband could have, you know, protected Anonymous's interests as much as he loves his daughter? And also, what do you and I, you know, learn from this? What is it that we need to do differently? Because we do not want to find ourselves in Anonymous's position, right? So, I mean, what happened here? How could have Anonymous protected her interests? You know, the most important thing that didn't happen here is that the type of conversations that were had prior to the marriage did not tap into what needed to be tapped into. Listen, when people are going to get married, one thing about their brain is that it's thinking about only the good aspect of this, and that is creating a union between two people. And that's exactly how people should be feeling, right? But it's also needed, especially in this day and age, that we also address certain things. One, How are your affairs standing right now? If you were to pass away, what are the plans? Do you have anything in place protecting certain people's interests? What about us, not that now we're getting married, we're going to be one? How are we going to structure our things? You know, a lot of people don't get to that thinking, and because of that, they then enter into a marriage, and they enter into a marriage that has certain consequences. In this instance, Anonymous entered into a marriage in community of property. Now, this type of marriage, what it actually states is we're going to combine everything. But as much as we combine everything, still people have the freedom to decide what will happen to their own 50%, which they own in this joint estate. And the biggest mistake was that I do not think that Anonymous's husband probably thought about updating his will, or thinking about if he leaves that will that way, how would it affect Anonymous? Because based on the picture that Anonymous painted to us, he was a lovely man, right? Someone who took care of her. But now, because of the fact that people often do not attend to these things on time or think about them, this is what happened. Another thing that did not happen, which led Anonymous to being in this situation, is that they both did not update their affairs on time. I always say to people that, you know, when you say you have a will, you cannot be talking to me about a 10-year-old will. You cannot be talking to me about a 20-year-old will. Why? Because things change, people change, relationships change, dynamics change. That will that you drafted years ago, does it still reflect who you are and what you want? The people that you probably have listed there as executors, as beneficiaries, how you arrange things, is it still how you want things to be? In most instances, the answer is no. But then you'd find that people say, I have a will. You don't. You have something that might cause havoc when you pass away because it is not updated. It's not reflecting you right now. Right? So that's also why Anonymous found herself in this situation. I don't think they got to that part where they now were intentional about their planning, because they have now become one. Because obviously the husband could have left something to his daughter, but in a better way that would not have compromised Anonymous losing this house. But now, because this thing was a blanket thing that everything I have goes to my daughter without a proper structure, Anonymous ended up losing something that she worked for herself. So what could have Anonymous done better? One, is to plan her affairs and have this discussion with her husband. She could have done that, and she would have been in a different situation. Number two, if Anonymous had thought about this prior to the marriage, she probably would have opted for a different type of marriage. If the husband, for example, was insistent about, the daughter getting everything that he owns, then that would have been a red flag for Anonymous to say, you know what, because I don't want to lose this property that I've worked for, maybe it's a good idea we enter into a marriage out of community of property. Not because she's thinking that he's coming here for malice, but to protect the investment that she said she had purchased prior to getting married. The third thing that Anonymous could have done was to look into her own affairs prior to getting married, in the sense that if she really wanted to get married and in community of property and wanted to maintain this as something that she possesses because she deems as an investment or something of value, she could have placed it in a trust before even getting married to her husband. That way, that particular possession, which is that immovable property that she ended up losing, could have been safeguarded. And then she could have gotten married to Anonymous in community of property, and they could have actually built every other thing in that marriage. There's so many things that Anonymous could have done here to try and protect herself from losing this property. But like I said, because marriage is such a beautiful thing, nobody wants to take their mind away from anything beautiful prior and sometimes when in the marriage. And this is when people experience such situations. And what could have Anonymous's husband done differently? Oh man, sometimes you want to wake up people and be like, come and see what has happened. If only you knew. So, Anonymous's husband, I'm not sure where his mind was at, but I'd like to think he was absent-minded about the fact that he needed to look into his affairs, because he had drafted a will a couple of years ago. But the problem with this will is that he drafted it before he had someone like Anonymous in his life. And according to Anonymous's story, it seemed like he really loved Anonymous and his daughter. So surely if he loved Anonymous and the daughter, had he been, present-minded about this whole situation of planning his affairs, maybe he would have taken different steps. In particular, what would have helped here is him revisiting his will and saying, okay, now I am married. Now I've got an additional person who's also someone who I'm looking after their interests. It may not necessarily be financial, but I want to ensure that their interests are protected. Had he done that, he would have at least come up with a plan to ensure that his daughter gets exactly what she needs, but then making sure that Anonymous's interests are protected, i.e. the home that Anonymous brought into the marriage at least remains protected, so that she has a home, a roof over her head. But now, because he did not do this, he did not get the opportunity to put this plan together. It's very important, irrespective of a will you have, whatever the case is, that you revisit such things, because life changes. And so if you have now a change of family structure, a change of significant aspects of your life, it's important, way important, to ensure that you revisit your plans, to ensure that everybody's interests are going to be protected. And this, unfortunately, is not something that Anonymous's husband did. And as a result, Anonymous lost her property. So what's my advice to you? In fact, before I get to my advice to you, there's someone who said, why does this happen? Remember, it happens because you, as someone who is alive in South Africa, you have a right to dictate what must happen to your assets. You have what we call freedom of testation, the right to determine who's going to inherit your things. Now, that's exactly what Anonymous's husband did. He dictated what was going to happen to his things, which was 50% of the joint estate. This is why Anonymous found herself in this situation. Now, what am I saying to you? What can you do differently? Exercise your right of planning and drafting a will, but also be mindful that before you draft this will, have a plan in mind, have a discussion with your legal practitioner. What do you think I should do here? Because I'm protecting more than one person's interests, and I'm looking at the dynamics. Have an open discussion before you put down bequests. This will help you to leave a much better situation for the people that you love. Do not just write, because you see what writing does? It impoverishes other people, and it might just benefit others, and it might just not leave a type of desirable situation that you are gunning for. So what have we learned here today from Anonymous? Just a quick recap. Listen, marriage is beautiful, but it comes with a lot of changes. It changes your right to certain things, how you can do certain things. So when you're getting married, be present-minded. Have a discussion with your spouse or prospective spouse about a number of things. Have uncomfortable discussions, especially if they look after the interests of others. Know where they want to head in terms of their future plans. How do they want to leave their things? That also guides the both of you as to how you need to structure this marriage, and when you enter, maybe what it is that you need to do together to ensure that both your interests are protected, while also you're protecting the interests of other family members, because guys, we love our families and we are always looking out for their interests. So why not talk about it? And also, just something to be mindful of is that there is nothing that's typically wrong about you guys opting for a different type of marriage, especially if you have, desires that might just compromise your interests. Have an open and honest discussion. Thirdly, be intentional in your planning. When life changes, when dynamics change, revisit your plans, revisit your bequests in that will. It must reflect your life at present. Think about everyone who's going to be affected. Think about their interests. Then you structure it on your will. This is why I always say, do not miss an estate plan. Do not just go for bequests, because you don't know what the bequests come with. They may just come with complications, just like in Anonymous' story. And also, just in closing, what I want to encourage you to do: one, plan your affairs. You're young, I'm young, but we don't know what could happen tomorrow. We've got people that we want to protect their interests. So we are obligated to do planning. We are obligated to have wills. And thirdly, we are obligated to continuously look at our affairs and see how we can structure them better, not only for our personal gain, but also for the benefit of others that we may leave behind, more especially people who we love and are responsible for. Guys, let's close it. I hope you gained something here today. And if you did, you better be sharing this video, because we want people to be educated. Listen, next week we're also going to be narrating another story. Maybe we might even have someone and have a little discussion in studio. Who knows? But stay here with us. We are going to have these discussions. This is just the start. You are going to see us unravel much more. Thank you for joining us. And again, my name is Yolanda Nyengeza. I am based in Johannesburg. I'm an attorney by profession. So this is where I get my experiences and stories. We will talk next time, right here on The Legal Detour. They say prevention is better than cure. We'll see you next time.